All right, so I'm going to give my breakdown on the UFC 317 Media Day interviews and also the UFC 317 press conference that just went down. Even though this press conference was, again, like 15 minutes long, I enjoyed it, and I caught the face-offs at the end, and we're about to get some really good fights, and I have a better idea of who's getting chin now. So let's start with the Media Day interviews. I want to talk about the fighters who I watched talk to the individual journalists on the panel yesterday whenever I had uploaded the video about the prospects that had just gotten signed. Joshua Ben was the first interview that I watched. He said that he'd sub Brandon Royval if they went to the ground while he was smiling. So I'm not sure if he was serious about that. But they asked him about, Joshua Ben, what happens if this fight goes to the ground? He's like, I'm prepared for all outcomes. If we go down to the floor, I'm going to sub him. And he starts laughing, and the journalist laughs with him. And they go on to the next question. A lot of the questions around Joshua Van's media day were basically like, yo, Joshua Van, how does it feel to be that guy at flyweight? And Joshua Van is literally like, dude, I don't go outside. I haven't even been home yet. I don't know. And that's good, because if he was on his nuts over this win over Bruno Silva, that would be bad going into this fight, which I feel like is going to be exponentially harder. I don't feel like I know it's going to be exponentially harder for him. He said in this media day interview that the fight with Bruno Silva was like a go of hard sparring before a very serious fight, and this is a serious fight that's upcoming. So Joshua Van looks very mentally matured, and his fight was on the last numbered event, so it's like a month and some change for the turnaround, maybe even less time. It's hard to gauge because things are moving really fast. We're about to watch Ilia Topuria fight Charles Oliveira, dude. Oh my gosh. But he fought Bruno Silva. He looks really locked in. So this is going to be a good fight. He's going to put on a good fight. He's taking this less serious fight more seriously than Cyril Gane took his title shot with John Jones. And the whole time that he was doing the media for that week, it just looked like he was happy to be there. And John Jones even made an observation. He was like, yeah, this guy, Cyril Gane, is just happy to be here. Joshua Van is happy to be there, but he knows that he matters and that he's there to accomplish something. I like the way that his answers were directed in the interviews that he did. Ilia Topuria sits down. I immediately notice that he has on a $300,000 Patek Philippe on his left wrist. This is like the Nautilus chronographer. I don't know much about watches, but this is a very expensive watch, and it just kind of helped me contextualize exactly what he was about to say to these people who are asking him questions, and I wasn't wrong. Ilia Topuria doesn't care about any of this. I mean, as far as like the theatrics that made Conor McGregor part of who he was, Conor McGregor is gone, and you know what? That's okay. That's okay, because the drama show, it helps and hurts fighting because you get storylines out of it, but the narratives for the fighters that they're involved with, it usually ends really bad for someone. And in the event of Khabib and Conor McGregor, it kind of ruined his career, dude. So Ilia Topuria is playing it smart. I'm going to go out there and just perform, but if I am going to talk trash, it's going to be about something that I'm willing to back up and that I will demonstrate through my skills as to why I should be taken seriously, as opposed to having viral clips that get reposted from these moments where he's just bashing the people that he's fighting against. I think it's pretty admirable the way that he's being so respectful to everyone, but still brutally flatlining all of them. They ask him, how does this fight week feel? I mean, you're a lightweight for the first time. You're fighting for a belt in this new division. How do you feel, Ilia Topuria? And he's like, if I can be honest with you guys, it feels the exact same. And I don't wonder why it feels the exact same, because it is the exact same. I'm going to go in there and just do the exact same thing. And that comforts me so much for the fact that I picked Ilia Topuria to win this fight. It really amazes me how a guy who has everything from a material perspective can still stay so engaged and locked in towards this goal of becoming the greatest fighter ever. I mean, dude, he doesn't need to fight. He already has the Patek on his wrist. It's the same deal with Armin. Armin pull up in that Ghost or that Cullinan, the Rolls Royce thing, and why does he fight? Nobody's complaining about it because we get good performances out of these dudes who we know are great contenders, but it's an enigma. A guy comes from a broken past or had no money or no prospects for a good future and he gets into fighting. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. But this dude, he could have been anything, and he still chose to break people's faces inside of a cage. I tip my hat to you, Ilia Topuria. Let's talk about the next fighter whose interviews I watched. This was like an 8-hour long interview because the process of watching Charles Oliveira speak is they have to ask him the question in Portuguese. The translator has to repeat the question in English. He answers in Portuguese. Then the translator repeats his answer in English. Through this game of telephone, it's about a minute between each 2-sentence long interaction that he has with each journalist. And it's an absolute headache to listen to. They're like, Charles, you said online that you are the lion. You are going to assert yourself in the cage. You are going to take the center. You're going to control. And he nods as they're translating it to him on the mic, and he smiles. And then the question finishes, and it's like, so what do you think about the fact that Ilia Topuria has accounted for your game plan and that he wants you to do exactly what you plan to do to win? Whenever Charles Oliveira gets asked a question like this, at any point throughout this entire build-up, he always says, the champion has a name. I'm going to show them who the lion is. And he just keeps on saying Liao, 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 Liao. And it's like, lion, that's what it means. I can surmise that much. I don't know any Portuguese, but just from the fact that he says it so much, I have a general idea of what he's talking about. They asked him about what he thought about the game of Ilia Topuria as well. And he mentioned that at Shooter Box, they have a term for fighters like Ilia Topuria. And he says that Ilia Topuria is good at, this is the translation from the guy who's really good at translating Portuguese to English, eating at the sides. Think about what that means, okay? Ilia Topuria, he said his movement is really good. He gets to angles and he accrues incremental damage to do large damage, and he eats at your sides. This is a perfect assessment of the fight style of Ilia Topuria and exactly how he's going to beat Charles Oliveira in their fight on Saturday. He's going to eat at his sides. I think that the finish is going to come to Ilia Topuria via a body shot, and that this makes me even more confident of it. The fact that he knows that he's vulnerable to these types of strikes because Ilia Topuria is going to get in there and eat at his sides like a piranha. Whenever I say that McGregor is gone, what I mean by that is we don't have any prospects who are at the point of their careers where they're skilled enough to be champions, but they're young enough to the point where these types of outings, like fighting for belts, feel new to them and they're fresh. It's not to say that the hunger is gone, because these guys definitely want to achieve their goals a lot. But their faces don't change. They don't get flustered. It's like they would be needing to fight Tom Aspinall in order to show any type of emotion towards fighting in MMA at this point of their careers. Both of them, Ilia Topuria and Charles Oliveira. They're not phased. You can't say that either of these fighters are scared of each other. And that's why I'm confident that this fight is going to end in a knockout. They're going to be in there trying to prove who's less scared of the other person. And that's going to result in somebody going to sleep. They're very respectful on these mics, but there's going to be an immense lack of respect being shown to each of their stand-up games inside of the cage, where they each just try to work their own offense over the offensive plan of their opponent. These guys seem fired up, even though they're not chatting that much at each other. This should be a good fight. I think that Charles Oliveira is pretty poised. So based off of his disposition, I can see this being a lot less free than I've imagined it in my head. So another fighter interview that I watched was Payton Talbott. The reporters, they were asking questions of Payton Talbott about the Frank Ocean interactions that he's been having online. They didn't ask about Valentine's Day, but they asked about a Frank Ocean music video, but it was like an Instagram post. And dudes who are into that whole like Tumblr feed, like Frank Ocean aesthetic, oh my god, I feel so cringe even saying that. Oh my god. They like get really particular about how you address his discography because they see him as God. So he immediately got offended by the fact that he called that Instagram post a music video. The journalist, Payton Talbott, was like, what do you mean music video? And he started getting all smug. And he was like, oh, I don't know. I just saw you. There was Frank Ocean's music in the background, and then you were there on the screen. I just want to know, has your life changed after being featured in that IG post? Payton Talbott knew what was going on, and he didn't react much. The journalist was trying to get him to come out of the closet on camera. And he acted like nobody would ask about this. You let Frank Ocean post a picture of you on his Instagram story on Valentine's Day. And you were like swimming in a pool shirtless with like this high-pitched male voice in the background on his Instagram, dude. And you think that people aren't going to talk or ask you about that? They were gracious in not bringing that up right whenever it happened as he was fighting Raoni Barcelos. Because that was something they could have asked him about. It's been some time now, and like, they've forgone badgering him about this for a while, and he was acting like nobody was ever going to bring it up. You can't see the journalist whenever they ask questions, but whenever the journalist said, Payton Talbott, how has your life changed after you started hanging out with Frank Ocean in the public eye? I could imagine that whenever he stopped talking, he dropped the mic and he just started looking at Payton Talbott like... And that's why Payton Talbott started geeking like that. The final individual fighter interview that I watched was going to be from Alexandre Pantoja. Pantoja, he is a baller for sticking with English and for knowing just enough to read a children's book. And I'm not saying that to like defame him, but that's literally all you need. As far as English speaking level proficiency, all you need to be able to do is get through the end of a Dr. Seuss book. And if you're good enough at fighting, you have an English speaking fan base. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. It's just if you speak English, you become an immensely marketable star in the UFC. Pantoja is a hooper because 5 years ago, he did not speak English. Whenever he was talking about how he had to drive Uber to like make ends meet, that was in Portuguese and translated. I don't know what the heck he was talking about. Back to what I was talking about with Charles Oliveira. His interviews are almost unwatchable because you can't get any essence out of them, because depending on what you're doing and how long your attention span is, dude, like by the time that the reporter asked the Portuguese question, you've forgotten the English one. And by the time that Charles Oliveira answers in English through the translator, you forgot what they're even talking about. You have to rewind it, and you have to watch several moments of the interview lots of times in order to get the meaning out of it that you're supposed to. And then it's not even what he actually says because it's translated to English. All you gotta do is learn how to speak well enough just to convey your thoughts. And then anything after that, it just makes you more likable. Pantoja, he's excited because this dude, Kai Kara-France, because of the style and the power output of Kai Kara-France, he has a better chance of losing this fight, Pantoja does, than his last 3 challengers presented. Because with fighters that are as dominant as Pantoja and Merab, like I talked about these guys who are incumbent for a long time, Makhachev as well, you have to knock these dudes out. Bilal, he damn near got knocked out on multiple occasions in that fight. You gotta come out and you gotta put some serious punches on these guys. Kai Kara-France, he's powerful and he has good finishing instincts. But I think that he knows that this is barbecue chicken because he can always rely on the wrestling. A lot of people who've been talking about this fight, fighters and other MMA people, they favor Kai Kara-France to win this because of the KO threat. But Pantoja is just my boy, and he's going to be wearing them cool pants this time, dude. Like, no shot. So now we're going to talk about the UFC 317 presser. Renato Moicano is so entertaining. Renato Moicano and Beneil Dariush, they both stole the show. And it was inadvertent. All they had to do was just start asking Renato Moicano a question. They started talking about losing the fight with Renato Moicano. They're like, Renato, if you lose this fight, that is a weird question to ask a fighter. In the context of him about to be competing in a matchup, why would you ask him about the outcomes of him losing? Even though he knows that he's going to have a job. Renato Moicano, he does what he does best. He got the crowd fired up, started screaming about how, I fought Makhachev. And he got fried in that fight, but he was in there with the best fighter. That's pound for pound number 1. They're all so dehydrated. These are big fighters for each of their weight classes, so everyone was really lethargic and tired up there. I'm excited for them to all make weight just so that we can get that done and over with. That's just such a stressful part of this whole process. I could only imagine how they feel about it, because as a fan, I'm always worried about if these guys are going to make weight or not. Imagine something goes horribly wrong and Ilia misses by a half pound, and he still knocks out Charles and he doesn't become champion. That may end up messing things up in the future for Ilia versus Islam if Islam does end up winning against JDM if they make that fight soon. Makhachev said that he wouldn't come back to 155, so he would need to fight Armin or something. I need everyone to make weight, is what I'm saying, because just playing that out in my head is giving me anxiety right now. I don't want to think about that. One of the journalists ends up asking a question of Brandon Royval. They're like, Brandon, you've before in the past called yourself the most disrespected fighter on the roster. How do you feel about this fight? Do you consider it to be a number 1 contender fight? And do you think that beating a fighter like Joshua Van, who you've also called the most entertaining flyweight on the roster, is grounds for you to be next in line for the title? And Dana White was like, hold on, wait, what was the question? And one thing about Dana is everyone, oh yeah, Dana bald, evil man, we hate Dana White, and yeah, Dana White sucks, but he has a conscience, dude. And sometimes, through this whole process, imagine you had, how many fighters are on the roster in the UFC? We'll say it's 300 to maybe lowball, 300 fighters, 300, 250. Imagine you had 250 children, and your job was to treat all of them fairly. You're going to mess up at some point, but whenever Dana White messes up, he rectifies it. And so the journalist asked Brandon Royval if he thought that this fight would be a number 1 contender matchup. Brandon Royval was like, yeah, I'd hope that it would be. And Dana White immediately interjected with his own statement, and he was like, wait, did you just call this guy the most disrespected fighter in the UFC? Whenever he heard the journalist say that, he was probably like, man, I've been jerking around Brandon Royval for years, dude, and he's just been cool with it. I'm going to solidify his title shot opportunity if he wins this fight. And in doing that, he wins anyways because he can push Joshua Van further. And that's what everyone wants to see too if he does manage to win this fight. It was fun to watch Ilia Topuria tell a journalist who brought up Khabib to be quiet, and another guy who also brought up Islam Makhachev and how he saw this fight playing out. he told him to be quiet. The journalists were walking on eggshells because a lot of them wanted to talk about Islam for some reason in context to Topuria winning this fight and then being able to challenge. But we have to address the fact that he's fighting Charles Oliveira first. And not a lot of them were doing that, and that was kind of frustrating at times. Ilia Topuria handled it very well. He just told them to shut the fuck up. It's the same deal with the Islam stuff as the Talbott interviews with the Frank Ocean stuff when it's like he who will not be mentioned. Because, you know, the journalists just want to come out and say to Talbott, do begin on all fours. But it's the same thing with Ilia Topuria. They're asking him questions about whether or not he'd go up and chase Makhachev to 170 after he wins this title. Like, it's already something that's done. And I would like to believe that it is kind of that type of party, but he needs to do this first. And we need the moment, and we need to be able to watch it back on video first before we start talking about Makhachev and him chasing a third belt, dude. Ilia is a businessman. He came out with that same $250,000 watch on his wrist, and he sat down and he took the questions, and he answered with poise. He and Dana are probably getting so close. And if he wins that fight, he's going to be Dana's boy. And he's going to start getting a lot of different opportunities, I feel like. Because he's a bigger draw for this division than Islam. And ultimately, Dana likes the people who can make him money. And I don't think that he's wrong for that. He runs a business. So Ilia Topuria will definitely start getting a lot of preferential treatment if he does pull this off. There's a couple of performances that I want people to keep an eye out for. Brandon Royval, this is a fighter we need to watch because he feels snubbed. And I think that he wants to put a stamp on this. Brandon Royval doesn't have much of a leg to stand on, and like complaining as to why he can't get back to belts after losing title shots and then beating contenders who had just fought for belts and lost themselves. And it's not really his fault, because if there was more depth in the division, he could have fought someone that wasn't Brandon Moreno after he lost to Pantoja. But look at the past, even the new contenders that they want to test to get to the belts, it's always through Brandon Royval, because he's just off of a win of Tatsuro Taira, and he beat the crap out of that guy, and we thought that he was about to be a dude who could beat Pantoja. A lot of guys who were making contender lists of like prospects who could challenge for belts and beat the champions, they were choosing Tatsuro Taira to win against Pantoja, and he got beat up by Brandon Royval. And I think it's going to be the same thing here. And I think that Brandon Royval is really motivated to make people understand that you can bring these new guys up high and I will cut them down because I'm the dude. He's in a Corey Sandhagen position where Corey Sandhagen is going to do the exact same things, even though he doesn't really fight many young contenders who are coming up through the rankings. If you do put him in fights with people like Font or Chito Vera or Davison Figueiredo, he's going to win those matches, and he's going to keep those guys from getting to belts, even though these are fighters that we want to see challenge for those titles. I appreciate how Ilia Topuria remains so modest in answering questions like, do you think you're the face of the UFC? He's like, I don't really like answering questions like this. And then the journalist was like, well, do you see yourself as someone who can grow influence for the sport of MMA and promote it to be bigger than it already is? And then Ilia was like, you know, I really hope that I can do that at least. But the face of MMA, I don't know. And they asked Dana White the same question Ilia did. He was like, what do you think, boss? Am I the face of the UFC? And Dana was like, what was the question? And then they asked him the question again, and he was like, listen. He gave a very non-incriminating answer. If that wasn't a thought that he was taking seriously, he would have said no, or he would have smiled at Ilia or gave some type of gesture to let the journalist know that he asked a dumb question. He basically said that there's a bunch of fighters in the UFC that are doing great things for the sport and the promotion, that he appreciates all of them. And then that segued into a next question that Dana White was asked by a journalist, which was, it was funny, honestly. I don't know why people get so mad about these questions. I feel like they could be better, but there is a bit of language games that you have to play with guys who have the temperament of fighters, and then a promoter who has the temperament of Dana too, if you want to keep on coming to these events. If you're a guy who shows up and vexes these fighters with your questioning, because the questions are too directed towards things that they don't want to talk about, they're probably not going to have you back, even though you're going to get a good clip out of it. But this guy, he asked Dana, he's like, Dana, are you going to be mad if Ilia keeps on sparking legends? And if he knocks out Charles Oliveira, is that going to make you upset? And Ilia Topuria starts laughing, and Dana White, he smirks, and he's like, all right, sir, you've just won the award for asking the weirdest question at a press conference ever. But genuinely, how do you feel as a promoter? If you've invested and poured your heart and soul into this Charles Oliveira title run and to promoting him whenever he would fight because of how big of a star that he was and became from like 2020 to 2022, and now you're just hand feeding him to another guy who's doing the same thing, I mean, you're getting something out of it because it's another dude you can promote in his place, but how does that make you feel? The question could have been framed differently, but I kind of get what he was trying to say. Ilia isn't totally arrogant. I really like the way that he answered the question about, they specifically asked him, do you see yourself as a McGregor or a Ronda Rousey type figure who will come into this sport and leave the game and change it by the time that you're gone? Ilia Topuria has a funny voice. I like the way that he talks. He's like, yes, I think that it would be a great honor for me to take this challenge, and I seek to be influential as I can, and I hope that I can be what people want me to be. Charles has just been droning on about the lion all week. In that media day interview and then at the press conference as well, they asked him about the fight. And he was just talking about the champion has a name and that he's a lion. If Charles Oliveira is a lion, then he's Mufasa. And that boy Ilia is Scar. Like, we're about to see some nasty stuff. As soon as Dana locked in the fact that Van versus Royval will be for a #1 contender fight, that really hyped up Brandon Royval. And he got on the mic and he was like, let's do this, Van. We're about to get some bonuses. And everyone else got fired up too whenever they said that. I feel like everyone is trying to make bonuses. Benil Dariush and Renato Moicano, they were talking about money. You know, Renato Moicano is just going to talk about some money. So he's trying to get his bonus. Benil Dariush is going to be forced to fight. And if he is able to match the aggression and outlast it and beat Renato Moicano, then he's going to get himself a bonus. Payton Talbott versus Felipe Lima. There's not a whole lot of steam on that one. Nobody really asked either of them questions. But another performance we got to watch out for. We really need to watch out for Kai Kara-France, man. Look out for him. I'm getting weird vibes off of him, like he may pull this off. Like this upset may be imminent. Because he knows what he needs to do. He says in the interviews that he has to repeatedly land hard shots on Pantoja in order to get him out. And this is a guy who can do that. So they fought before. It was 9 years ago whenever they were both nothing compared to what they are now. So we're going to see whose game has evolved more. We know that Pantoja is very good, and I do put faith in the fact that he probably will win this fight. But really do watch out for Kai Kara-France. Good press conference. I really did enjoy this a lot. The face-offs were nice. Not really too much intensity out of Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira speaks Portuguese. Ilia Topuria speaks Spanish. I guess there is some overlap in these languages so that whenever they speak it towards each other, they can kind of understand. But they may have just both been talking to themselves. But it seemed like they were having a conversation up there on the stage whenever they were facing off. The UFC Shanghai main and co-main event, it's been announced for that event, which is going to be taking place on August 23rd. I am very excited to watch. Fight night card, I think. I think it might be a fight night card. It will be happening in China, though, so that's the reason why they're having Mingyang Zhang headline against a guy like Johnny Walker, who he's 800% going to knock out. Unless Johnny Walker, I don't know. Like, there is no unless. Like, Mingyang Zhang is going to chin him. He can do whatever he wants here. This is a showcase fighter. Like, this is a guy who you can come in and get some hype off of. And Mingyang Zhang doesn't need these types of layups, but they're still giving them to him anyways. So, what do you think he's about to do to Johnny Walker? You can just leave it in the comment section. Whatever your guess is, probably. And this is an infinitely more interesting fight in the co-main event, but neither of them are Chinese, so they couldn't headline. Which, I mean, yeah, if you're going to go to China, you have to have a Chinese fighter on the main event of the card. That makes perfect sense. But still, man, this is a fight that I've wanted to see for a very long time. So this is, I'm excited, because this is just some UFC 5 smoke, dude. Brian Ortega versus Aljamain Sterling at featherweight. Imagine these scrambles, dude. Because both of them are good at playing heavy top mounts in jiu-jitsu, but both of them have really solid guard games. And it seems like both of them are about as good at doing both. So as far as the grappling goes, it's 50-50 in all positions for both of them at all times. And that is so exciting, dude. Even if we get a decision out of this, there's going to be some really fun moments that are produced through the scrambles that we're going to be able to witness them both get into. There's a high likelihood of a submission as well. Both of these fighters know that in their careers they're not the best strikers and that they can probably outsmart each other on the ground because they're high-level jiu-jitsu practitioners. So what we may see is them actually opting to initiate grappling over striking. Which, I mean, they're definitely going to strike with each other, but we definitely might still see some takedowns be shot. And we've seen in fights like Kamaru Usman versus Khamzat Chimaev, where they stood a lot and shot only sometimes. Brian Ortega versus Aljamain Sterling will be different because there's going to be a lot of wrestling here. And it's going to be in China too, so this will be taking place at a weird time. I'm going to pick Aljamain Sterling to win this fight because I feel like he needs a very important win at featherweight in order to solidify himself as a fighter in the UFC. If he's been competing at this weight class inactively for like a couple of years now, maybe even 3 at this point, he's got to get something like really cool done here. And he had an opportunity to win against Movzar. I wish he could have got that done, man. And he did beat Calvin Kattar, which was nice. You lost to O'Malley and you got chinned brutally, but you submitted Brian Ortega. So come over here and shake my hand, Aljamain Sterling. Let's get a photo together here. Let's get a picture. Happy International Fight Week. We get to watch UFC 317 in 2 days.